Let's see if I can keep this library small. I wrote a few notes to myself a little earlier because things are moving at a little bit of a faster pace now, right? When you think of rate of change over time and space based on density and multidimensional consciousness. Frame rate speeds, ISO frame rate speeds, exposure rate, blinking the eyes, the CRT screen. So I wrote down here the rate of exchange is rate of bioengineering seeded races recovering. And I've covered this subject off and on through videos a long time ago, not just on this channel, about frequency wars, antenna wars, which are, when you get right down where the rubber hits the pavement, are genetic engineering wars, which you could say is wars between computers, wars between computer codes, right? Biocomputers, the biofield consciousness, biofield directed consciousness energy. My oversoul's running this computer, right? How many computers can you run? Right? How many motherboards can you run at once? Right? Imagine that. How many matrices can you run at once? So you know the one is everywhere. So you already know the computing power of the one. This is the eternal spirit of fire. That's where I get all my data, right? Translated through geometrical mathematical forms of the spiritual flow of energy. It goes on forever, gifting electrons, right? So this is where, when I was a little kid in the 1950s, when it came to the money system, right? So I grew up with this, and sort of what instigated this was I listened a little bit from time to time, Bill O'Reilly, and he talked about debt. Now, see, when I grew up as a child, my dad got me a bank account. I took a sheet of paper out with a line on it, left and right, about polarity, the calculus, the negative and the plus, and said, you have your assets and your liabilities. And so the way that this would go would be the rate of exchange, right? Wastewater treatment exchange between incoming electrons, right, and outgoing waste product. The speed at which you're bioregenerating, right? You're rebuilding yourself. What's been lost as a result of what? Genetic engineering wars against codes, other codes. So this is where the virus gets in, right? A code virus, retrofit, refit, right? Remember, the gloves don't fit with O.J. Simpson. If the gloves don't fit, the math don't work. And so I was reminded when Bill O'Reilly talked about getting out of debt. You have assets and you have liability. Incoming electrons, right? And outgoing waste product, your liabilities, right? And so when I grew up as a kid, back then, we did still have, silver coins, right? And quarters, believe it or not, in the 50s were actually, what were they, silver? And then you had silver certificates. Ones that I remember were called red seals. They had red seals on them, right? Some people called them greenbacks, right? And then you had the bank that my father took me to when I was a little kid to go set up an account, had a little, the bars, like barcode, the teller, right? Like Edward Teller, right? That said gold window. So what that meant is that I could work at the car wash like I did when I had one of my first jobs, application of consciousness, to put my consciousness, my identity, in answering the questions, filling out a form, right? Programmable matter forms. And then I apply that, right? And they say, hey, you can vacuum out automobiles for, what was it, Mama, about $1.35 an hour, right? And doing that after school every day when I was in elementary school. And then, because I was a pretty big kid. So they didn't care. You know what a sweatshop is with children. There's some folks that, hey, if you're a big enough kid and you look like you can do the job, they're more than willing to pay for it, particularly if they experience high energy. And this was really the point of this video. When you're dealing with bankers, BA, right? BA, bank, NK. And so when I realized that if you wanted to have a lot of stuff, right, artifacts that come out of what nature naturally generates and produces. So if you're going to go into the lumber business, then you need the lumber to sell. So to get it, you got to go killing trees. Right? Now you turn it into a dead commodity, which is a dead-like commodity. Right? So go look at the cost of lumber today and look at the cost of lumber 70 years ago. Right? So now you get into building materials, how long things last. Now we get into the cost of living, the cost of inflation. And the number 300, by the way. Go back and do the math, like in 1972, when Nixon became president, and why that 72 is related to 72/144. And how that applies to the RH factor and what? Voltage lines of communication, right? Between genetic engineering. That's right. And so when Nixon became president, we went off the gold standard. But the point here was when I realized that, okay, let's set up a little scenario here. You're the banker. I go into the bank and I look at the banker and he's saying there, I can give you a loan. And I'm going, okay, well, let's cut to the chase. I'm energy, you're energy. I'm running a battery, you're running a battery. So what you're wanting to do is you're willing to sell me energy because I'm having to pay it back to you. Or in this case, you're going to loan me. Are you loaning me your energy? Is that what you're saying you're going to do? No, we're going to loan you a number. Or you're going to give me a number. Okay, so how big is the number that you're willing to exchange to me, which means you're going to give me that number, and then associate a biometric account, which is who I am as a soul, right, associated to that number. So let's say that I want to go buy a new car, right? And according to the dealership, which they own also, that I want to buy that car for, say, $1,000, but I don't have $1,000. So what you're willing to do is you're willing to tell me that you're willing to give me $1,000, and $1,000, right, is now going to be given to me by you, okay? And I'm sitting here realizing that $1,000, okay, that really represents one, right? But it's simply a number that is associated with my account. Now I can use that to go buy that car. But what you're telling me is that now I've got to pay you an additional 17% on that? Well, if you're the bank and you started out and all you had was $1,000 sitting in the bank, right? And it means that that's all that's in circulation, for example. That's all that's in circulation, that all the other units of consciousness can use as the means to do what? Exchange electrons, protons, and neutrons between incoming electrons and waste product. So now what you're telling me that I got to do is I got to pay you back, okay, more electrons than what it is that you gave me, okay, when I'm running higher energy than you are, which means I'm putting out a lot more electrical output than you are. That means that there's anybody that's going to be running a bank, don't you think it ought to be the highest source of energy there is instead of an inverter? Because it seems to me this banking system that you set up is inverted, which means in order to run your bank, you need a source of energy to run it. And you're running your printing presses, which means you're simply just printing money, which is a monopoly game money. It's just phony, fake money. And you're using our soul's energy in which to print it. And then wanting our soul's energy to be used as slave batteries to run your financial system. And that's a crime on a global scale. Because we're the source of energy, because you don't have a soul. Because who do you think is running the financial system? Numbers. A dead-like magnet. Okay. So that energy that represents those numbers that are held in account numbers on those account number notes which is an allocation